The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse like angry fists demanding entry. Edward Mendes stood motionless, a silhouette against the glittering canvas of Manhattan's nighttime skyline. At 52 years old, he cut an impressive figure, 6 feet tall, silver-threaded dark hair impeccably styled, shoulders still broad, despite the weight of grief they carried. His $3,000 Tom Ford suit hung perfectly on his frame, tailored to precision. In his right hand, a crystal tumbler held 3 fingers of Macallan 30-year whiskey, the amber liquid catching the city lights and throwing golden reflections across his lined face. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes that had once sparkled with ambition and love, now held nothing but vast emptiness. The penthouse around him was a monument to success and a mausoleum of memories. Minimalist Italian furniture in shades of gray and white. Abstract art pieces worth hundreds of thousands of dollars adorning stark white walls. A Steinway grand piano in the corner that hadn't been played in 3 years. The space was temperature-controlled, acoustically perfect, and utterly devoid of life. Edward took a slow sip of the whiskey, barely tasting the complex notes of dried fruit and oak that connoisseurs would rhapsodize about. He had learned that expensive things didn't bring happiness, they just brought expensive emptiness. His cell phone vibrated on the marble countertop, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent apartment. He glanced at the screen without moving to answer it. Rodrigo Sanchez, his driver and head of security for the past 15 years, a good man, loyal, one of the few Edward still spoke to regularly. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Edward sighed and picked it up. "Yes, Rodrigo? Mr. Mendes. Good evening, sir." Rodrigo's voice carried the slight accent of his Puerto Rican heritage, warm and respectful. "The car is ready whenever you are. I have the route to the office mapped out. Should take us about 20 minutes with current traffic." Edward closed his eyes. Friday night, he had promised himself he would go into the office, catch up on the quarterly reports, review the proposals for the Boston development project, anything to avoid another weekend alone in this glass cage. "Cancel it, Rodrigo. I'm staying in tonight." There was a pause on the other end. Rodrigo knew better than most how much Edward needed to stay busy, to keep moving, to avoid the stillness where memories lived. "Sir, you have the meeting with the Nakamura representatives tomorrow morning at 9. The Japanese investors, they flew in specifically to meet with you about the Tokyo partnership. Reschedule it." Edward's voice was flat, emotionless. "Sir," I said, "reschedule it. Rodrigo, tell them I'm ill. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. I'll deal with the fallout on Monday." "Yes, sir." "As you wish." Rodrigo's disappointment was palpable, even through the phone line. "Is there anything else you need this evening?" "No. Take the weekend off. Spend time with your family." "Thank you, sir. But if you need anything, I won't." "Good night, Rodrigo." Edward disconnected before his driver could respond. He looked down at the phone in his hand and saw 6 missed calls from his executive assistant, Margaret Chen, 3 voicemails, probably frantic about the Nakamura meeting. Margaret was brilliant, efficient, and perpetually worried about Edward's increasingly erratic behavior. He set the phone face down on the counter and walked to his study, a room lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with first editions he never read anymore. At his desk, an antique partner's desk that had cost him $40,000 at auction, he unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a shoebox, plain, unremarkable, from a pair of shoes he bought years ago. He lifted it carefully, as if it contained something fragile and precious, which in a way, it did. Photographs, dozens of them. Edward spread them across the desk with trembling hands. Maria, at their wedding, radiant in vintage lace, her dark eyes sparkling with joy and mischief. Maria, on their honeymoon in Santorini, the Aegean Sea behind her, her hair whipping in the wind. Maria in the garden of their Westchester estate, dirt on her nose from planting roses, laughing at some joke he'd made. Maria asleep on the couch with a book on her chest. Maria, 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 his wife of 25 years, his best friend, his anchor, dead 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. A drunk driver, wrong place, wrong time. She had been coming home from an art gallery opening in Soho. The police said she died instantly, that she hadn't suffered. Edward didn't believe them. In his nightmares, and he had them every night, she suffered endlessly. He picked up their wedding photo, the largest print in the collection. They had been so young. He was 27, just starting his construction company with borrowed money and borrowed time. She was 25, a freelance illustrator with more talent than clients. Neither of them had money. Her family, old money, Connecticut blue bloods, had disapproved strenuously. They thought she was marrying beneath her station, but Maria hadn't cared. Love doesn't have a price tag, she had told her scandalized mother. And Edward is worth more than all your country club friends combined. They had proved everyone wrong. Edward's company had grown from a 2-man operation to one of the largest construction and development firms on the East Coast. The Mendes Group now employed over 2,000 people and had projects in 15 states. Forbes had recently valued his net worth at $847 million, and what did any of it matter? Edward pressed the photograph to his chest and closed his eyes. "Why did you leave me, Maria?" he whispered to the empty room. "Why did you go out that night? Why didn't you take the car service like you usually did? Why did you have to be on that street at that exact moment?" The questions had haunted him for 3 years. There were no answers. There would never be answers. He sat there in his study until the sky outside began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, the photograph clutched in his hands, tears drying on his face, a man who had everything and nothing at all. On the other side of Manhattan, in a neighborhood that real estate agents euphemistically called transitional and residents called broke, the St. Isabel Home for Children was waking up to another chaotic morning. The building was a 3-story brick structure that had been old when Lyndon Johnson was president and had only gotten older since the heating was temperamental at best. The plumbing made alarming sounds, and the paint on the walls was so old it had probably been applied with lead, but it was home to 37 children who had nowhere else to go. The second-floor girls' dormitory, a room designed for 8, but currently housing 12. Sophia Silva lay awake on her narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles she had long ago memorized. At 15 years old, she was small for her age, barely 5'3", with light brown skin that spoke to her mixed Puerto Rican and Irish heritage, dark brown hair that fell in unruly waves past her shoulders, and eyes of an unusual greenish hazel that changed color depending on the light. Those eyes had seen too much for someone so young. Sophia had been awake since 4:30 in the morning, a habit born from necessity rather than choice. She had learned years ago that deep sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford in places like this. Sleep too deeply and you'd wake up to find your shoes missing, stolen by someone who needed them more or just wanted to trade them. Sleep too deeply and you might miss the sounds of trouble brewing, a fight in the hallway, staff doing bed checks, the older girls planning something that could get everyone in trouble. So Sophia slept lightly, when she slept at all, and spent a lot of time pretending to sleep while actually being hypervigilant. She turned her head slightly, careful not to make the bed springs squeak, and surveyed the dormitory. In the bed to her left, Keisha Washington, age 9, slept curled in a tight ball, her thumb in her mouth even though she was too old for that. The kid had been at St. Isabel's for 6 months, dropped off by a mother who said she'd be back in a few days and hadn't been seen since. In the bed to her right, Jessica Chen, 13, was also awake, staring at her phone under the covers. Jess had been cycled through for foster homes in the past year alone. Behavioral issues, the social worker said. Though Sophia knew the truth, Jess just asked too many questions and refused to be invisible. Directly across from Sophia, Maria Rodriguez, 16, was getting dressed for her Saturday shift at McDonald's, moving quietly so as not to wake the others. Maria would age out of the system in 2 months. She had an apartment lined up, a studio in the Bronx that cost more than she could afford but was better than the alternative. Maria was one of the lucky ones. She'd graduate high school, she had a job, she had a plan. Sophia had none of those things. She sat up slowly, her hand automatically reaching under the thin pillow to check that her notebook was still there. It was her most precious possession, a simple spiral-bound sketchbook with a black cover, already 3/4 full of drawings, faces of people she'd met, places she'd imagined, worlds where girls like her got happy endings. She pulled the notebook out and opened to a random page, a portrait of her mother, or at least, the woman she thought was her mother. The details were fuzzy because Sophia had been only 5 years old when both her parents died in an apartment fire in Washington Heights. She'd been at a friend's house for a sleepover, had survived purely by chance. Everything else, her parents, her home, her life before, had gone up in smoke. What remained was a single photograph, creased and faded, and memories that might not even be real. Had her mother really sung to her in Spanish? Had her father really had a deep laugh that rumbled like thunder? Or had Sophia invented these details over the years, building memories from wishes? Sophia, you up? Sophia quickly closed the notebook and looked up to see Mrs. Lawrence standing in the doorway. Patricia Lawrence was the assistant director of St. Isabel's, a heavy-set woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and a permanent expression of exhausted disapproval. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't kind either. She was simply overwhelmed, underpaid, and tired of dealing with dozens of damaged children with a staff of 3 and a budget that hadn't increased in 5 years. "Yes, ma'am," Sophia said quietly. "You've got visitors." "Meeting room, 10 minutes. Mrs. Lawrence's tone suggested this was not good news. Sophia felt her stomach drop. Visitors meant only one thing: another prospective foster family. Another round of forced smiles, probing questions, and false promises that would end the same way they always did, with her being returned like defective merchandise. "Can I skip it?" Sophia asked, knowing the answer. "No. 10 minutes. Comb your hair. try to look hopeful. Mrs. Lawrence's mouth twitched in what might have been an attempt at sympathy before she turned and clomped back down the hallway in her sensible shoes. Sophia stood and walked to the communal bathroom, a dingy space with cracked tiles and mirrors spotted with age. She looked at herself, hair a mess, dark circles under her eyes, lips pressed in a thin line of resignation. She splashed cold water on her face, dragged a comb through her hair, and tried to rearrange her features into something that might pass for hopeful. She failed. In the 11 years she'd been in the system, Sophia had been placed with 13 different foster families. 13 times she'd packed her meager belongings, climbed into a social worker's car, and gone to live with strangers who promised they wanted her. And 13 times, within weeks or sometimes months, she'd been brought back. The reasons varied. Didn't fit in with our family dynamic. She's too withdrawn. We expected someone more grateful. She stole from us. That last one stung because it was true. Sophia had stolen. Food mostly, and once a coat because winter was coming and she knew she'd probably be sent back before she could ask for one. She'd been right. The longest placement had been 6 months with a family in Queens. The Johnsons, they'd seemed genuinely nice, a middle-aged couple whose own children had grown up and moved out. Mrs. Johnson baked cookies. Mr. Johnson told dad jokes. Sophia had started to believe, to hope, to let herself imagine that maybe this time it would be different. Then she'd had a panic attack at school, triggered by a fire drill, because of course it was, and had to be sent home. The school called her emotionally disturbed. The Johnsons, despite their kind smiles and baked goods, had decided they weren't equipped to handle special needs. Back to St. Isabel's she went. Sophia had learned her lesson. Hope was dangerous. Belief was foolish. It was better to expect nothing and be proven right than to hope and be destroyed. She walked down the 2 flights of stairs to the main floor, her footsteps echoing in the quiet building. Most of the kids were still asleep. Saturday morning was the one time they could sleep in. The meeting room was a small space off the main office, with institutional gray walls, a table that wobbled, and inspirational posters that Sophia had long ago stopped reading. Through the doorway, she could see them. The prospective foster parents, a couple in their late 30s or early 40s, dressed in carefully casual clothes, not too expensive, not too cheap. The woman had blonde hair and a nervous smile. The man was tall, balding, wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt. They looked kind. They all looked kind at first. Sophia took a deep breath, arranged her face into neutral politeness, and walked into the room. Here we go again, she thought. 13 times unlucky, maybe 14 would be different. But she didn't believe it for a second. Dr. Anthony Costa sat in his small office at the back of St. Isabel's home, surrounded by filing cabinets stuffed with the broken stories of broken children, and contemplated doing something that might be either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. At 64 years old, Anthony had dedicated his entire adult life to social work. He'd started fresh out of grad school with idealism and energy, believing he could save every child, fix every broken system, right every wrong. 40 years later, he was grayer, tired, and significantly less idealistic. But he still believed in fighting for kids who couldn't fight for themselves. And right now, he was fighting for Sophia Silva. He looked down at the file open on his desk. Sophia Maria Silva, born March 12th in New York City. Parents Carlos Silva and Bridget O'Connor Silva, both deceased. Entered the foster system at age 5, following the death of both parents in a residential fire. 11 years in the system, 13 foster placements, all disrupted. Current status, at risk for institutional placement in a residential treatment facility. That last line made Anthony's jaw clench. Residential treatment facility was bureaucratic speak for what was essentially a last-stop institution for kids the system had given up on. Heavily structured, highly restrictive, focused more on behavior management than actual care. Kids went into those places and came out damaged in new ways, if they came out functional at all. Sophia Silva was not a bad kid. Anthony had reviewed her file extensively, had spoken with her multiple times. She was smart. IQ tests put her in the gifted range, though her grades didn't reflect it. She was talented. He'd seen her drawings, remarkable for someone her age. She wasn't violent, wasn't a substance user, hadn't been in trouble with the law. Her only crime was being traumatized and not hiding it well enough. The problem was that Sophia was too old, too damaged, and too honest. Foster parents wanted cute younger kids who would be grateful and adjust easily. They wanted children who would slot into their existing families like missing puzzle pieces. Sophia, at 15, with visible emotional scars and a well-developed defensive shield, didn't fit that profile. But Anthony knew something that Sophia's file didn't reflect. She had enormous potential. If someone could just see past the armor to the frightened, brilliant, talented girl underneath. If someone had the patience and resources to help her heal, she could thrive. The question was, who? And then, like a lightning bolt, Anthony thought of Edward Mendes. He and Edward had been friends since their college days at Columbia University. They'd been unlikely friends, Anthony studying social work, idealistic and passionate about helping people. Edward in the engineering program, pragmatic and ambitious, determined to build an empire. But they'd bonded over late-night study sessions, shared frustrations with professors, and a mutual love of jazz. They'd stayed in touch through the decades despite their diverging paths. Anthony had watched Edward build his construction empire, had attended his wedding to Maria, had been there when Maria died. He'd watched his friend hollow out, becoming a ghost of the vital, energetic man he'd once been. Edward hadn't dated anyone since Maria's death. He'd thrown himself into work with almost manic intensity. His sister Marianne had told Anthony, in confidence, that she was worried Edward might do something drastic. The man was drowning, and work was the only thing keeping his head above water. But what if Anthony could offer him something else? Not a distraction, but a purpose, a reason to come back to life. It was crazy. Edward wasn't a father. He had no experience with children, let alone a traumatized teenager. He traveled constantly for work. His house, though enormous, had been essentially abandoned since Maria's death. But Edward had resources. Money? Obviously, but more than that, time, if he chose to take it. A beautiful home in Westchester that sat empty. And most importantly, Edward had loved Maria, who had always wanted to foster or adopt children. When things settled down, she'd always said, when we have more time. Time had run out for Maria, but maybe this was a way to honor what she'd wanted. Maybe this was something that could save two people instead of just one. Anthony picked up his phone before he could talk himself out of it and dialed Edward's number. It rang 5 times. Anthony was about to give up when the call connected. Anthony Edwards' voice was rough, like he'd been sleeping, or not sleeping. It's early. It's 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, is it? Edward sounded genuinely surprised. I lost track of time. Are you okay, my friend? There was a long pause. Define okay. Anthony's heart ached for his friend. I need to ask you something, a favor, a big one. He heard Edward sigh. I give your charity plenty of money, Anthony. The annual donation just went through last month. This isn't about money. Well, not just about money. Anthony stood up and walked to his office window, looking out at the broken playground where a few early rising kids were playing. I need you to listen to me all the way through before you say no. That's never a good sign. There's a girl here, Sophia Silva. She's 15 years old. Been in the system since she was 5. She's had 13 foster placements, and every single one has fallen through. Anthony, let me finish. She's about to be transferred to a long-term residential facility upstate. It's basically a holding facility for kids. The system has given up on. She goes there, and any chance she had at a normal life disappears. She ages out of the system in a few years, with no resources, no support, no family. Statistics say she end up homeless, in jail, or dead within 5 years. That's terrible, but I don't see what it has to do with me. I want you to take her. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Anthony, are you insane? Probably, but hear me out. Foster care? Temporary placement. Just 3 months. That's all I'm asking. 3 months where she can live in a stable home, get consistent schooling, have someone who isn't overwhelmed and underpaid trying to help her. 3 months where she doesn't have to worry about being sent to that facility. I don't know anything about teenagers, about kids, about you have that house in Westchester that's sitting empty. You have more money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. You have time, Edward, even if you won't admit it, time. I run a multi-million-dollar company that runs fine without you micromanaging it every second. Margaret has told me how many days you just sit in your office staring at nothing. Marianne says you're not really living anymore. You're just existing. You and my sister need to stop gossiping about me. We're worried about you. We love you. Anthony took a deep breath. Maria would have wanted you to do this. He heard Edward's sharp intake of breath. Don't use Maria to manipulate me. I'm not manipulating you. I'm reminding you of who you were, who you could be again. Maria always talked about fostering or adopting. Remember? She said once your business was more stable, once you had more time, she wanted to give a child the kind of love and opportunities she'd had. She's gone, Anthony. Those plans died with her, did they? Or did you just bury them along with everything else good in your life? Anthony knew he was pushing hard, maybe too hard, but he had to make Edward understand. I'm not asking you to replace Maria. I'm not asking you to suddenly become Father of the Year. I'm asking you to give one girl 3 months, 90 days, food, shelter, basic human kindness. If it doesn't work out, she goes back to the original plan, and you can go back to your glass tower, and your expensive whiskey, and your slow suicide by loneliness. That's not fair. It's completely fair. Edward, you're my oldest friend. I've watched you build something extraordinary. I've watched you love someone with everything you had, and I've watched you die by inches for 3 years. This could be good for both of you. She needs someone with resources and patience. You need something to live for besides quarterly earnings reports. Another long silence. 3 months, Edward finally asked. 3 months, that's all. She gets transferred at the end of April if something doesn't change. I can hold off the transfer if she has a placement. Give her a chance. Give yourself a chance. I can't promise I'll be any good at this. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for presence. Show up. Be kind. Don't give up on her the way everyone else has. Anthony could almost hear his friend thinking, weighing, struggling. Tell me about her. Really tell me. Anthony sat back down at his desk and opened Sophia's file. Smart as hell, but her grades don't show it because she's moved schools so many times. Artistic, she draws constantly. Really beautiful stuff. She's been diagnosed with PTSD and depression, which makes sense given she watched her parents' apartment building burn when she was 5. She's guarded, defensive, doesn't trust easily. She'll test you. She expects to be disappointed. She sounds like a lot of work. She is. But Edward, she's also a kid who just needs someone to not give up on her. That's it. That's all she needs. More silence. Then, when would this start? Anthony felt a surge of hope immediately. This week if possible. There's paperwork, obviously, home study, background checks. But I can fast-track it given your situation. My situation. Wealthy, stable, upstanding citizen with no criminal record, and a house that could fit 20 kids. I don't want 20 kids. I'm not even sure I want one. But you're not saying no. Another pause. No, I'm not saying no. I'm saying, let me think about it. 24 hours. Fair enough, Edward. Yeah, thank you for even considering it. I know this is crazy. But sometimes crazy is exactly what we need. After they hung up, Anthony sat back in his chair and said a small prayer to whatever might be listening. It was a long shot. Hell, it was an insane shot. But if it worked, it might just save the people who desperately needed saving. He just hoped they could save each other before they destroyed each other instead. Edward stood in the middle of the master bedroom of his Westchester estate and felt like an intruder in his own home. He hadn't been here in months, since December, maybe, when Marianne had dragged him out for Christmas dinner and he'd left after an hour, unable to bear the cheerful decorations and forced holiday spirit. The estate was massive, a colonial revival mansion built in 1927, sitting on 12 acres of carefully maintained grounds. 8 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a library, a formal dining room, multiple sitting rooms, and more space than any 2 people had ever needed, let alone 1 person living alone. But it had been Maria's dream house. She'd found it 12 years ago, fallen in love instantly, and convinced Edward to buy it, despite his protests about the impracticality. They'd spent 5 years renovating it, Maria making every design decision, pouring her heart into creating the perfect home. And then she'd died, and the perfect home had become a perfect mausoleum. Edward walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them with fresh eyes, or trying to. The furniture was still covered in white sheets. He'd had the cleaning service do that after the first year, when he couldn't bear to see Maria's carefully chosen pieces anymore. The art on the walls was obscured. The curtains were drawn. Everything was preserved, frozen in time, like Miss Havisham's wedding feast. This was where Anthony wanted him to bring the traumatized 15-year-old girl. He climbed the curved staircase to the 2nd floor and walked down the hallway to what had been designated as the guest wing. 4 bedrooms here, all of them perfectly appointed and completely unused. He opened the door to the largest one, the blue room. Maria had called it because of the soft, blue-gray walls she'd personally selected. The room was beautiful, a 4-poster bed with a white canopy, an antique desk by the window, built-in bookshelves waiting for books, a window seat overlooking the gardens, a connecting bathroom with marble counters and a clawfoot tub. It was the kind of room a teenage girl might dream about, or might find intimidating and alienating. Edward sat down on the edge of the bed, sending up a small cloud of dust despite the cleaning service's best efforts. Could he really do this? Could he bring a stranger, a damaged, difficult stranger, by all accounts, into this house, into this space he'd shared with Maria? Would it be a betrayal of Maria's memory, or would it be honoring what Maria had always wanted? His phone buzzed. Text message from Marianne. Anthony called me, said you're considering something crazy. Call me now. Edward sighed and dialed his sister's number. She answered on the first ring. Have you lost your mind? Good morning to you too, Marianne. Don't good morning me? A teenage girl? Foster care. You, Edward, you can barely take care of yourself right now. Edward stood and walked to the window, looking out at the overgrown gardens. Maybe that's exactly why I should do this. What, can't keep living like this, Marianne. I know you're worried. Anthony's worried. Hell, I'm worried. I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to swim back to shore. So your solution is to take on responsibility for a traumatized child. How does that help? I don't know if it does, but doing nothing definitely isn't helping. Edward rubbed his face with his free hand. Maria wanted to foster kids. Did you know that? Vaguely. Yes, she talked about it all the time. Once things settle down, she'd say, once the business is stable, once we have time, we were going to take the time. And then, he couldn't finish the sentence. Oh, Eddie. Marianne only called him that when she was feeling emotional. You can't make decisions based on what Maria would have wanted. She's gone. I know she's gone. Trust me, I'm painfully aware every single day that she's gone. Edward's voice cracked. But maybe this is something good I can do. Something that matters. Anthony's right, I'm not really living anymore. I'm just going through the motions. At least this would be something that could blow up in your face spectacularly. You don't know anything about teenage girls. You've never been a parent. What if she hates you? What if you can't handle it? What if it works? What if I can actually help someone? What if this saves me and her? Marianne was quiet for a long moment. You've already decided, haven't you? I think so. Yeah. Then I'm coming over right now. We need to talk about this face to face. Marianne, I'm already in my car. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't do anything stupid before I get there. She hung up before he could protest. Edward pocketed his phone and continued his tour of the house. The kitchen enormous, professionally equipped, barely used. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cooked anything more complicated than coffee. Maria had loved to cook. Sunday mornings had been their ritual, elaborate breakfasts. The kitchen full of wonderful smells, the two of them working in companionable silence or easy conversation. What would he feed a teenage girl? Did teenagers eat anything special? He had no idea. The library, 2 stories of books, a rolling ladder, comfortable leather chairs, a fireplace. Maria had spent hours here, curled up with a book and a cup of tea. Would Sophia Silva like to read? Did she even know how to relax enough to enjoy a book? He walked outside to the gardens. They were overgrown now, despite the lawn service's best efforts. Maria had had specific visions for every flower bed, every path, every tree. She'd spent hours out here, with her hands in the dirt, creating beauty. Everything in this house was Maria. Could he share it? Should he? When Marianne arrived, she found him sitting on the back patio, staring at the November brown gardens. It's cold out here, she said, wrapping her coat tighter. I didn't notice. She sat down in the chair next to him. Marianne was 4 years younger than Edward, 50 years old, but looked younger, with dark hair cut in a sleek bob and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She ran her own interior design firm in Manhattan and had built a successful career independent of her brother's money, which she was proud of. Tell me why you really want to do this, she said without preamble. I told you, tell me the real reason. Not the Maria reason, not the Anthony reason. Your reason. Edward considered the question carefully. Because I'm tired of being empty. Because this house is dying along with me, and that seems like a waste. Because maybe, if I can help someone else, I'll remember how to help myself. That's a lot of pressure to put on a 15-year-old kid, I know. But Anthony says she needs someone who won't give up on her. Everyone else has. Every foster family, every placement. She expects to fail. What if I could be the one person who proves her wrong? And if you prove her right instead, if you take her in and then can't handle it and send her back, that might destroy her completely. Then I don't send her back. I commit to the 3 months, no matter what. Even if it's hard. Even if I suck at it. 3 months. I could do anything for 3 months. Marianne studied her brother's face. You look more alive talking about this than you have in 3 years. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I honestly don't know, she sighed. If you're going to do this, and it seems like you are, then you need help. This house needs to be livable again. The furniture needs to be uncovered. The rooms need to be aired out. The kitchen needs to be stocked. You need to think about schools, therapy, activities. You can't just bring a kid into a mausoleum and expect her to flourish. I know. I'll call Isabel. Isabel Garcia had been the family's housekeeper for 20 years. After Maria's death, Edward had kept her on retainer to maintain the Westchester house, even though he barely visited. She lived in a separate carriage house on the property and treated the estate like it was her own. Isabel will be thrilled, Marianne said. She's been begging you to come back here for years. I know. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching birds hop around the bare garden. Are you scared? Marianne finally asked, terrified. Good. That means you're taking it seriously. She reached over and squeezed his hand. I think this is either going to be the best decision you've ever made or the worst. There's no middle ground, I know. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of activity that left Edward exhausted, overwhelmed, and questioning his sanity at least once per hour. Isabel Garcia had indeed been thrilled when Edward called to tell her what he was planning. The 62-year-old housekeeper had known Edward since he was in his 20s, had watched him fall in love with Maria, had mourned Maria's death almost as deeply as Edward himself. She had been quietly devastated watching the Westchester house, Maria's dream home, turn into a sealed tomb. Mr. Edward, this is wonderful, she had exclaimed over the phone, her slight Dominican accent growing stronger with emotion. Miss Maria would be so proud of you. When do we start? Immediately? We have less than a week to make this house livable. We need more than a week too. We don't have more. The paperwork is being expedited. Sophia could be here by Saturday. Isabel had let out a low whistle. Then we better get to work. She'd arrived at the estate that same afternoon with her daughter Rosa and two of Rosa's friends. The small army had descended on the house with cleaning supplies, determination, and enough energy to rival a hurricane. Edward had watched in amazement as they'd uncovered furniture, washed windows, scrubbed floors, aired out rooms that had been closed for years. The house had slowly come back to life under their ministrations. Dust covers came off to reveal Maria's careful furniture selections. Curtains were opened to let in natural light. The library's fireplace was cleaned and tested. The kitchen was scrubbed until it gleamed. The blue room, Isabel had said on the second day. That's the one for the girl. Yes, yes, I thought. It's the nicest guest room. Good light, good view. Miss Maria would approve. Isabel had touched his arm gently. She always wanted this house to be filled with life and laughter. Children running through the halls. You're honoring her dream. Mr. Edward, I'm terrified I'm going to screw this up. Good parents should be terrified. Means you care enough to worry. I'm not her parent. I'm just temporary. Isabel had given him a look that suggested she didn't believe that for a second, but she'd said nothing. While the house was being prepared, Edward had been drowning in paperwork and bureaucracy. Anthony had indeed expedited the process, calling in favors and pushing through channels, but there were still forms to fill out, background checks to undergo, a home study to be scheduled. The home study social worker, a brisk woman named Janet Morrison, had arrived on Thursday morning with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and was impressed by nothing. She'd walked through the house, taking notes, asking questions, and where does the child sleep? The blue room, second floor. Show me. Edward had led her upstairs, trying to see the room through her eyes. Isabel had outdone herself. The room was pristine but warm. New bedding in soft blues and whites, fresh flowers on the desk, books on the shelves, a mix of classics and young adult novels that Marianne had rushed out to buy, a bulletin board on one wall, empty but waiting for photos or drawings, towels and toiletries in the bathroom. It's very nice, Janet had said, making a note. Very expensive. Is that a problem? It can be. Sometimes kids from difficult backgrounds feel uncomfortable in settings that are too different from what they're used to. They feel like they don't belong, so I should make the room worse. No, Mr. Mendes, I'm just noting that there may be an adjustment period. Sophia Silva has spent most of her life in group homes and working-class foster families. This, she gestured around the room, is going to be quite a shock. Edward hadn't thought of that. Of course, Sophia would feel out of place. This house was designed for people with old money and old tastes. What would a 15-year-old from the Bronx think of marble bathrooms and antique furniture? I can change things, he'd said. Make it more normal. I'd advise letting Sophia have input. Let her put her own stamp on the space. It will help her feel like it's truly hers. Janet had continued her inspection, checking fire alarms, outlets, lock systems. She'd asked about Edward's work schedule, his plans for Sophia's education, his support system. You're unmarried, no children of your own, you work extensive hours. What happens when you're at the office? Who supervises Sophia? Isabel Garcia, my housekeeper. She lives on the property, and I'm planning to reduce my work hours significantly. You can do that. I own the company. I can do whatever I want. That must be nice. Janet's expression suggested she didn't think it was nice at all. Mr. Mendes, I'm going to be frank. This is an unusual situation. Wealthy single man, no experience with children, taking in a teenage girl with significant trauma history. It raises questions. What kind of questions? Edward had felt his defenses rising. About motivations. About suitability. About whether this is truly about helping Sophia or about something else. Edward had stared at her, anger and hurt warring in his chest. If you're suggesting something inappropriate, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what other people will think. What the system will scrutinize. You need to be prepared for skepticism. For people questioning your every move. For Sophia herself to potentially question your motives. My motive is to help a kid who needs help. That's it. Then you'll have to prove that through actions, not words. This placement will be closely monitored. Any concerns? Any red flags? And Sophia will be removed immediately. Understood? Janet had finished her inspection and spent another hour going through protocols, expectations, and legal requirements. By the time she left, Edward had felt like he'd been through an interrogation. How'd it go? Marianne had asked when she'd arrived that afternoon to help set up the rest of the house. I'm apparently suspicious for being wealthy and single and wanting to help a child. Welcome to the foster care system. They're protective, can you blame them? No, but it still sucks. Marianne had laughed. Get used to it. Parenting is full of people judging your every decision. I'm not parenting. This is temporary. Sure it is, that same knowing look Isabel had given him. The week had continued in a blur. Edward had met with the local school district to discuss Sophia's enrollment. He'd consulted with a therapist recommended by Anthony about trauma-informed care. He'd read articles and books about foster parenting until his eyes crossed. He'd stocked the kitchen with food, too much food, probably, but he had no idea what a teenage girl ate. He'd also dealt with his business, taking meetings and reviewing contracts while trying to extract himself from the day-to-day operations enough to be present for Sophia. Margaret had been skeptical, but supportive. "You're sure about this, Edward?" "Not even a little bit. But I'm doing it anyway. You know the Tokyo project needs your attention next month. Then it'll have to wait or be handled by someone else. For the next 3 months, I'm going to be—" He'd paused, searching for the right word. "Present here, not traveling constantly." Margaret had raised an eyebrow. "In 30 years of working together, I've never heard you say anything like that. First time for everything." Now it was Friday evening. Sophia would arrive tomorrow morning. The house was ready. The paperwork was complete. The room was waiting. Edward was sitting in the kitchen, Maria's kitchen, which he'd barely entered in 3 years, drinking coffee and trying not to hyperventilate. Isabel found him there, staring into his mug like it held answers to unasked questions. "Mr. Edward, you need to eat something. Not hungry? When's the last time you had a real meal?" He couldn't remember. "I'm fine. You're nervous. That's normal." She sat down across from him. "Can I tell you something? Can I stop you?" She smiled. "When I first came to work for you and Miss Maria, I was terrified. You were both so young, so successful, so different from anyone I'd worked for. I was sure I would mess something up, say the wrong thing, break something expensive." You never seemed nervous, because Miss Maria made me feel welcome. She didn't treat me like the help. She treated me like family. She asked about my daughter, remembered my birthday, talked to me like I mattered." Isabel's eyes were misty. "That's all Sophia needs too, not perfection. Just someone who makes her feel like she matters. What if I can't do that? What if I'm too broken myself? Then you figure it out together. Being broken doesn't mean you can't care about someone. Sometimes it means you understand better." Edward wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe he could do this, that he wouldn't fail Sophia the way 13 other families had failed her. But belief required hope, and hope had been in short supply for a long time. "I should get some sleep," he said, standing. "Big day tomorrow." Mr. Edward Isabel waited until he looked at her. "Miss Maria would be proud, and Sophia is lucky to have you, even if she doesn't know it yet." Edward nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He went upstairs to the master bedroom, the first time he'd slept there in months, and lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the hell he was doing. Tomorrow, he would find out if this was redemption or disaster. He had a feeling it might be both. Chapter 6. The meeting, 50 to 65 minutes Saturday morning, dawned cold and gray, November asserting itself with the kind of weather that matched Edward's mood, overcast, uncertain, heavy with the promise of change. Edward woke at 6, after maybe 2 hours of actual sleep. He showered, shaved, changed clothes 3 times before settling on casual but neat dark jeans, a button-down shirt, a sweater, not too formal, not too casual. He wanted to seem approachable but responsible. He had no idea if he'd achieved either. Isabel had already made breakfast by the time he came downstairs. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, fresh fruit, enough food for 5 people. "I'm not hungry," Edward said. "Eat anyway." "You need your strength." "For what? Picking up a 15-year-old? For everything that comes after?" Isabel pushed the plate toward him. "Eat." He ate mechanically, tasting nothing. His stomach was in knots. At 8:30 he got in his car, not the Mercedes, which seemed too ostentatious, but the Volvo SUV that Maria had insisted on for its safety ratings. He had barely driven it since her death. Now he adjusted the seat, checked the mirrors, and pointed the car toward Manhattan. The drive took 45 minutes. The whole time, Edward rehearsed what he would say. "Hi, Sophia. I'm Edward. Welcome to formal." "Hey, kid. Ready to go?" To casual. "Nice to meet you." To everything. By the time he pulled up in front of St. Isabel's Home for Children, he'd decided to just wing it and hope for the best. The building looked even worse in person than he'd imagined. Cracked concrete steps, peeling paint, bars on the ground floor windows. This was where children lived. This was what the system considered acceptable. He climbed the steps and rang the bell. A young man in his 20s answered. Staff member, name tag reading, Marcus Edward Mendes. "Yes, come on in. Dr. Costa and Mrs. Lawrence are expecting you." The interior of the building wasn't much better than the exterior. Institutional gray walls, scuffed linoleum floors, the smell of industrial cleaning products barely masking older smells of too many people in too small a space. Somewhere upstairs, Edward could hear children's voices, shouting, laughing, crying, the sounds of chaos and childhood mixed together. Marcus led him to a small office where Anthony waited with a woman Edward assumed was Mrs. Lawrence. Anthony stood and shook his hand warmly. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Lawrence. This is Edward Mendes." Patricia Lawrence, Assistant Director. Mrs. Lawrence offered a handshake and a professional smile. "Mr. Mendes, we appreciate you stepping in on such short notice. Happy to help." Was he happy? He was terrified, but that seemed like the wrong thing to say. "I should brief you on Sophia before you meet her," Mrs. Lawrence said, opening a folder. "She's complicated. Anthony mentioned she's had multiple placement disruptions, 13, to be exact. It's not entirely her fault. Some families went into fostering with unrealistic expectations. Some weren't equipped for a child with her history. But Sophia she has walls up. She doesn't trust easily. She'll test you." "Test me how?" "She might be oppositional, withdrawn. She might break rules to see if you'll send her back, like the others did. She might steal small items because she's expecting to leave and wants to have supplies ready. She might run away." Mrs. Lawrence ticked off items like a checklist. "She's been diagnosed with PTSD and depression. She has nightmares. She struggles in school despite being quite intelligent." Edward felt overwhelmed. "Is there anything positive you can tell me?" Anthony jumped in. "She's artistic, really talented. She's kind to the younger kids here, protective of them. Actually, she's resilient as hell, which makes sense given everything she's survived. And underneath all the armor, she's just a scared kid who wants someone to stick around." "No pressure," Edward muttered. "The paperwork is all complete," Mrs. Lawrence said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Emergency contacts, medical records, school transcripts. You'll need to enroll her in school as soon as possible. She's been doing some online work here, but it's not ideal. I've already contacted the local high school. They're expecting her Monday." "Efficient." Mrs. Lawrence looked mildly surprised. "Good. Now, I should warn you, the first few days will likely be the hardest. Sophia will be testing whether you're serious about this. Don't take it personally." "How do I not take it personally if she's actively trying to make me send her back?" "You'll remember that it's not about you. It's about every person who ever gave up on her. You're just the latest in a long line. She has no reason to believe you're different. Then I'll have to show her I am different." "Easier said than done, but I wish you luck." Mrs. Lawrence stood. "Sophia's in the common room. I'll go get her." After she left, Edward turned to Anthony. "You didn't mention she'd tried to make me send her back. Would you have said yes if I had? I don't know. Maybe not." "Exactly. Look, Edward, this won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. Just be patient, be consistent, don't give up. That's all she needs." A few minutes later, the door opened again. Mrs. Lawrence came in, followed by a girl who looked smaller and younger than 15, carrying a battered backpack that seemed to be her only luggage. Edward's first impression of Sophia Silva was that she looked like she was trying to disappear into herself. She was tiny, maybe 5'3", probably less than 100 pounds, wearing jeans that were a bit too big and a hoodie that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes, when she briefly glanced up, were an unusual greenish hazel, intelligent and wary, and utterly without hope. She looked at Edward for maybe 2 seconds, then fixed her gaze on the floor. "Sophia, this is Mr. Mendes." Mrs. Lawrence said in a tone that was professionally cheerful and fooled absolutely no one. Edward stood, suddenly aware of how tall he was compared to her, how much space he took up. He didn't want to be intimidating. "Hi, Sophia, you could call me Edward." Silence. So, I guess we should get going." He looked at Anthony helplessly. Anthony nodded encouragingly. Edward tried again. "I have a house in Westchester. It's about 45 minutes from here. You'll have your own room, bathroom. Isabel, she's my housekeeper, made sure everything was ready for you." Still, nothing. Sophia stood completely still, arms wrapped around herself, eyes on the floor. "Is there anything you want to ask me, or anything you want to know before we go?" For a long moment, Edward thought she wouldn't respond at all. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, Why, what, why are you doing this?" She still wasn't looking at him. Nobody just takes in a kid they don't know. There's always a reason. "So what's yours?" The question caught Edward off guard with its directness. He could give her the easy answer that he was doing a favor for a friend, that he had the resources, that it seemed like the right thing to do. But something in the way she asked, in the bone-deep wariness in her voice, told him she'd heard all the easy answers before and didn't believe any of them, so he told her the truth. "My wife died 3 years ago. Since then, I've been existing, not living. A friend suggested that maybe helping someone else might help me remember how to be human again. So partly, I'm doing this for you, because you need a place to stay. But honestly, I'm also doing it for me, because maybe we can help each other." For the first time, Sophia looked directly at him. Really looked, studying his face like she was trying to read the truth in it. "That's the first honest answer anyone's ever given me," she said finally. "I won't lie to you, Sophia. This is new for me. I don't know what I'm doing. I'll probably make mistakes, but I promise I'll try, and I promise I won't give up. Easily, everyone says that. I know. But I mean it. They all meant it too. At first, Edward didn't have an answer for that. She was right. Words were cheap, and she'd heard them all before. The only thing that would convince her would be action, time, consistency. Things he couldn't prove in this moment. 3 months, he said. That's what we agreed to. 3 months where you have a stable place to live, food, school, someone who shows up. At the end of 3 months, we reassess. No promises beyond that. But for these 3 months, I'm all in. Can you meet me halfway? Sophia considered this. What does halfway look like? You come live at my house? You go to school? You follow basic rules. No drugs, no violence, no running away without at least telling someone where you're going. You give it an honest try instead of sabotaging it from day one. And if I do sabotage it, then we deal with it. But I'd rather you didn't. I'd rather we both had a chance to see if this could actually work. Another long pause. Then Sophia picked up her backpack. 3 months, she said. But when it's over, I don't want a big emotional scene. Just end it clean. No drama. Deal. They shook hands awkwardly. Sophia's hand was tiny in Edward's, her grip tentative, like she was ready to pull away at any second. Mrs. Lawrence handed Edward a folder. All our paperwork. Medical, educational, legal. My number is in there if you need anything. Thank you. Anthony walked him out to the car. As Edward opened the passenger door for Sophia, Anthony pulled him aside. You did good in there. Being honest with her, I didn't know what else to do. Honesty is exactly what she needs. She's had enough pretty lies. Anthony clapped him on the shoulder. Call me if you need anything. Anytime. I will. Thank you, Anthony, for pushing me into this. Thank you for saying yes. You might have just saved her life. Let's hope I don't screw it up. Edward got on the driver's side. Sophia was already buckled in, staring out the window, her backpack clutched on her lap like a security blanket. They pulled away from St. Isabel's home for children. In the rearview mirror, Edward could see Anthony and Mrs. Lawrence watching them go. He wondered what they were thinking. Whether they thought this would work, or if they were already preparing for another disruption to add to Sophia's file. The drive back to Westchester was silent. Edward tried a few times to make conversation, pointing out landmarks, asking about music preferences, but Sophia responded with monosyllables or not at all. Eventually he gave up and focused on driving. He caught her looking at the car interior with wide eyes, though she tried to hide it. The Volvo was nice, but not ostentatious, certainly nothing like the Mercedes he usually drove. But to a kid who'd probably never been in anything newer than a 10-year-old sedan, it must have seemed luxurious. What would she think of the house? As if reading his mind, Sophia suddenly asked, "How rich are you?" Edward was startled by the bluntness. Pretty wealthy, I guess. Like millionaire wealthy, or like billionaire wealthy. Closer to the first one. Great. So I feel like a charity case. You're not a charity case. You're a person who needs a place to stay, and I have more space than I need. It's logistics, not charity. Sure, her tone made it clear she didn't believe him. They exited the highway and drove through the quiet streets of Westchester. Sophia was looking out the window now with undisguised curiosity. The neighborhood was beautiful. Old trees, well-maintained colonial houses, perfectly manicured lawns, a world away from the Bronx. When Edward turned into his driveway and the gates opened automatically, he heard Sophia's sharp intake of breath. The mansion rose before them, white stone glowing in the gray morning light. The gardens, even in their November bareness, were clearly extensive and professionally maintained. It looked like something from a movie or a museum. Edward watched Sophia's face. She'd gone very still, very pale. You live here. Her voice was barely a whisper. Yes, I know it's big. Too big for one person, honestly. But it was my wife's dream house. She loved it. I don't belong in a place like this. Edward's heart hurt at the defeat in her voice. Hey, look at me. Reluctantly, Sophia turned to face him. You belong wherever you are. This is just a building, walls, and roof, nothing more. And for the next 3 months, it's your home too. Okay. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded slightly. They got out of the car. Isabel must have been watching for them because she opened the front door before they reached it, a warm smile on her round face. Welcome, welcome. You must be Sophia. I'm Isabel. Come in, come in. It's cold out there. Sophia followed them inside, moving like someone walking through a dream. Edward tried to see the foyer through her eyes, the sweeping staircase, the chandelier, the marble floors. It probably looked overwhelming, intimidating. Like everything she wasn't. Your room is upstairs, Edward said. Would you like to see it? A tiny nod. They climbed the stairs, Sophia trailing behind. Her footsteps whisper quiet on the runner. Edward led her down the hallway to the blue room and opened the door. Isabel had outdone herself. The room looked welcoming without being overwhelming. Fresh flowers on the desk, books on the shelves, new bedding, everything clean and fresh and ready. Sophia stood in the doorway, not entering. She was staring at the room with an expression Edward couldn't quite read. Shock, fear, disbelief. "It's really nice," she finally said. "It's yours, for as long as you're here. If you want to change anything, move furniture, put up posters, whatever, it's your space. All of this, just for me, just for you. The bathroom is through there." Edward pointed to the connecting door. "Isabel stocked it with toiletries and stuff, but if you need anything specific, just let us know." Sophia walked slowly into the room, still clutching her backpack. She touched the desk lightly, like she was afraid it might disappear. She looked at the books. She walked to the window and stared out at the grounds. "I've never had my own room before," she said quietly. "Never. At the home, we're 6-2 a room. Foster families. Sometimes I shared. Sometimes I got a converted space that wasn't really a room. Once I slept on a couch in a basement." Edward felt anger rise in his chest at the casual cruelty of that, but he pushed it down. "Well, this is your room now. No sharing required." For 3 months, he agreed. Sophia set her backpack on the bed. It looked pathetically small in the middle of a large mattress. "Is that all you have? We can go shopping if you need clothes, or I have clothes." Her voice had turned defensive. "Okay, but if you need anything, we can get it. No judgment." An awkward silence fell. Edward had no idea what to do next. Offer a tour, give her space, ask if she was hungry. Isabel solved the problem by appearing in the doorway. "Lunch will be ready in about an hour. Sophia, would you like to freshen up? Or, if you're hungry now, I can get you a snack. I'm okay." "Thank you. Well, I'll leave you to settle in. Mr. Edward, can I speak with you for a moment?" Edward followed Isabel into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. "Give her space," Isabel whispered. "She's overwhelmed. Let her process 'I don't know what I'm doing.' None of us do at first. Just be kind. Be present. The rest will come." Edward nodded. He knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Sophia, I'll be downstairs if you need anything." "Take your time." No response. He went downstairs feeling like he'd already failed somehow, though he couldn't say exactly how. This was going to be harder than he thought. Much, much harder. Chapter 7. The first day, 6580, minutes the afternoon passed in awkward, stilted increments. Sophia had stayed in her room for over an hour before finally emerging, drawn perhaps by hunger or boredom or the simple human need to not be alone. Edward had been in the kitchen with Isabel, ostensibly reviewing the week's meal plans, but actually just trying not to panic, when Sophia had appeared in the doorway like a ghost. "Hey," Edward had said, trying to sound casual and normal and failing at both. "Hungry." Isabel made sandwiches. Okay, they'd eaten lunch at the kitchen island, not the formal dining room, which seemed too intimidating in near silence. After lunch, Edward had offered a tour of the house. Sophia had agreed with a shrug, and they'd walked through the rooms, the library, the various sitting rooms, the formal dining room, the sunroom, the study. Edward had narrated awkwardly, pointing out features, giving history, feeling more like a real estate agent than anything else. Sophia had remained mostly quiet, occasionally making non-committal sounds. The only time she'd shown real interest was in the library, where she'd stopped in front of the bookshelves and actually looked at the titles. "You've read all these?" she'd asked. "Not all. Many of them were my wife's. She was the big reader. Can I read them?" "Of course. Any of them. That's what they're here for." Sophia had pulled out a worn copy of Jane Eyre and held it carefully. "I read this at one of my foster homes. Didn't get to finish it before it got sent back. Well, now you can finish it. Keep it as long as you want." She tucked the book under her arm like it was precious cargo. They'd finished the tour outside, walking through the gardens. It was cold, but Sophia hadn't seemed to mind. She'd been quieter here, more relaxed, away from the overwhelming opulence of the house. "There's a tree," Edward had said, pointing to an massive oak at the edge of the property. "It's over 200 years old. Maria loved to sit out there and read." Sophia had looked at the tree with something like longing. "You can sit there too whenever you want. The grounds are yours to explore. All of this is yours." "The whole thing 12 acres? Yeah, that's insane. You could fit like 100 families on this property." "I know. It's way more than any one person needs. Then why keep it?" The question was direct, challenging. Edward had appreciated the honesty, because selling it felt like giving up the last piece of Maria. This was her dream. I wasn't ready to let it go. And now, I don't know. Maybe it's time for the house to be lived in again instead of just maintained. Maybe that's what Maria would have wanted. Sophia had nodded slowly, like she understood, and they'd walked back to the house in companionable silence. Now, it was evening. Dinner had been another quiet affair. Isabel's chicken and rice, which Sophia had eaten methodically. Edward had tried to make conversation, asking about school, hobbies, interests, but Sophia's answers had been brief and guarded. What kind of stuff do you like to do? Don't know. Do you play any sports? No. What about music? Do you like music? Sure. What kind? Different kinds. It was like pulling teeth, and after a while, Edward had given up and they'd eaten in silence. After dinner, Sophia had retreated to her room again. Edward had stood in the hallway, wondering if he should check on her, wondering if that would be intrusive, wondering what the hell he was supposed to do. He'd settled for knocking on the door. Sophia, you okay in there? Fine. Do you need anything? Want to watch TV or something? No thanks. Okay, well, I'm downstairs if you need me. No response. Edward had gone to his own room feeling defeated. Day one and he was already failing. Sophia was miserable, he was out of his depth. This was a disaster in the making. He'd sat on his bed and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Anthony's number. How's it going? Anthony had answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting for the call. I think I've already screwed up. It's been less than 12 hours. You can't have screwed up that badly. She hates it here. She hates me. She barely talks. She hides in her room. This was a mistake, Edward breathed. What exactly happened today? Edward had recounted the day, the quiet car ride, the tour, the stilted meals, the monosyllabic conversations. That sounds completely normal for day one with a traumatized kid, Anthony had said when he finished. Normal. She's miserable. She's scared. There's a difference. Think about it from her perspective. She's just been dropped into a mansion with a complete stranger who happens to be a rich widower. She has no reason to trust you. She expects this to fail, so she's protecting herself by not getting invested. How do I get her to trust me? Time, consistency. Keep showing up, keep being kind. Don't push too hard, but don't completely disengage either. Let her come to you at her own pace, and if she never does, then you deal with that when it happens. But my guess, she will. She's testing you right now, seeing if you're for real or if you're going to crack under the slightest difficulty like the other families did. Don't crack. I'm trying, I know. And Edward, the fact that you're calling me worried about how she's feeling, that's a good sign. That means you care. Keep caring. After he'd hung up, Edward had felt marginally better. He'd changed into comfortable clothes and was about to call it a night when he'd heard a sound from downstairs, the piano. Someone was playing the piano. Edward had crept downstairs and peeked into the music room. Sophia was sitting at the Steinway, one finger pressing keys tentatively, picking out a simple melody. She wasn't playing, not really, more like exploring, testing. He must have made a sound because she'd whipped around, eyes wide. Sorry, I didn't hash the heart that was reborn. March arrived with the kind of weather that couldn't decide if it was still winter or ready for spring. Cold mornings, warmer afternoons, rain that came and went unpredictably. It matched the emotional climate of the Mendes household, which had settled into something that resembled normalcy but still carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. Sophia had been living with Edward for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of gradual progress, small breakthroughs, cautious trust-building. She'd made friends at school. Jen and her group had fully adopted her into their circle. Her grades were improving as she caught up on material she'd missed in previous schools. She'd started therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma, and while it was hard, she was doing the work. She'd even started calling the estate home occasionally, though she still corrected herself when she did it. Things were good. Not perfect, but good. Which, of course, was when everything fell apart. It started on a Wednesday. Edward was in his home office on a conference call about the Boston project when his phone buzzed with a call from Westchester High School. He'd excused himself from the meeting and answered. Mr. Mendes, this is Principal Harrison from Westchester High. I need you to come to the school immediately. There's been an incident involving Sophia. Edward's heart had stopped. What kind of incident? Is she hurt? She's not physically injured, but there was an altercation. I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Edward had canceled his meetings and driven to the school in record time, his mind racing through possibilities. A fight. Had someone hurt her? Had she hurt someone? What had happened? When he'd arrived at the school, he'd been directed to the principal's office, where he'd found Sophia sitting in a chair outside, her face pale, arms wrapped around herself. She'd looked up when she'd seen him, and her eyes had been full of something between relief and terror. Sophia, what happened? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. It's okay. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Just breathe. Principal Harrison had emerged from his office. Mr. Mendes, thank you for coming. Please, come in. In the office, the principal had laid out the situation. There had been an incident in the cafeteria. Another student, Brittany, the girl who'd questioned Sophia on her first day, had been asking questions about Sophia's living situation. When Sophia hadn't wanted to answer, Brittany had gotten louder, more insistent, eventually loudly announcing to the entire cafeteria that Sophia was some charity case foster kid living off a rich guy's guilt. Sophia, according to multiple witnesses, had told Brittany to shut up. Brittany had responded by saying something about Sophia's dead parents, and Sophia had snapped. She'd thrown her lunch tray at Brittany, hitting her in the chest and splashing food everywhere. Then she'd tried to physically go after the girl, only being stopped by other students and a teacher. Sophia has never shown violent tendencies before, Principal Harrison had said, but our zero-tolerance policy on physical altercations is clear. She's being suspended for 3 days. That's understandable, Edward had said, his voice tight. What about Brittany? What consequences is she facing for her harassment? Harassment is a strong word. She publicly humiliated a student, made deeply personal attacks, and brought up the death of Sophia's parents. That's textbook harassment and bullying. Principal Harrison had looked uncomfortable. Brittany's parents are very involved with the school. They've made significant donations. I don't give a damn about their donations. Their daughter was cruel and targeted, and if she's not facing consequences, then your zero-tolerance policy is clearly selective. The meeting had devolved from there, but Edward had held firm. By the end, both girls were suspended for 3 days, though Edward suspected Brittany's punishment was more about appeasing him than actual justice. In the car, on the way home, Sophia had been silent, staring out the window. Are you going to send me back? She'd finally asked, her voice small. Edward had nearly swerved off the road. What? No, why would you think that? Because I screwed up. I got violent. I embarrassed you. That's why the other families sent me back, when I wasn't perfect, when I made them look bad, when I was too much trouble. Sophia looked at me. She'd turned, tears streaming down her face. I am not sending you back. Not for this. Not for anything. You defended yourself against someone who was cruel to you. Yes, throwing the tray wasn't the best choice, but I understand why you did it. And you know what? I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. You're proud? I got suspended. You stood up to a bully who attacked you where it hurt most. That takes courage. Would I have preferred you used words instead of food trays? Sure, but I'm not angry. And I'm certainly not going to punish you by sending you away. But the school has rules, and you broke them, so the suspension is appropriate. But that doesn't change how I feel about you or your place in this house. You made a mistake. We all make mistakes. That's part of being human. Sophia had dissolved into sobs then, and Edward had pulled over into a parking lot so he could properly comfort her. I was so scared she'd cried. I thought this was it. I thought you'd finally had enough. Sophia, listen to me very carefully. I don't know what the future holds or how long you'll be here, but it won't end because you made a mistake or had a bad day, or even because you got suspended. If and when this arrangement changes, it'll be because we both agree it's time. Not because you weren't perfect enough. Promise. I promise. They'd sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes while Sophia cried out weeks of built-up fear and tension. Edward had held her, made soothing noises, and felt his heart break for how deeply she expected to be abandoned at the first sign of trouble. When they'd finally gotten home, Isabel had been waiting with hot chocolate and understanding these things happen. She'd said to Sophia, "You're human. Humans make mistakes, big mistakes sometimes, but the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, it's how they handle them afterward." That evening, after Sophia had retreated to her room, Edward had called Anthony to debrief. She thought I'd send her back, Edward had said, the pain evident in his voice. The second she screwed up, she immediately jumped to abandonment. That's what she's learned, Anthony had replied gently. 13 families, Edward. 13 times she wasn't good enough. That kind of conditioning doesn't go away quickly. How do I make her understand she's safe here? You keep doing exactly what you're doing. You stay when she expects you to leave. You support her when she expects punishment. Eventually, the consistency will sink in. But it takes time. I'm running out of time. The 3 months is almost up. Then extend it, make it official, file for longer-term foster placement, or start adoption proceedings. Edward had been quiet. The idea of adoption had been lurking in his mind for weeks now, but saying it out loud made it real. What if I'm not ready for that? What if I screw it up? You're already doing it, Edward. You're already her parent in all the ways that matter. The paperwork is just making it official. After the call, Edward had gone upstairs and knocked on Sophia's door. Can I come in? Yeah, she'd been sitting on her bed, drawing in her notebook, her usual coping mechanism. I want to talk to you about something, Edward had said, sitting in her desk chair. If it's about what happened today, it's not. Well, not directly. Sophia, you know the original agreement was 3 months, right? Her face had closed off immediately. Right, well, we're coming up on that. And I've been thinking, he'd taken a breath. What if we extended it? Made it longer term, or even permanent? Sophia had gone very still. Permanent how? Adoption. Making this official. Making you legally my daughter. The notebook had slipped from her hands. You? You want to adopt me? If you want that too? Yes. I know this is huge. I know you might need time to think about it. But Sophia, these last 2 months with you here they've brought me back to life. This house feels like a home again. I feel like I have purpose again. And more than that, I've come to care about you deeply. But I'm difficult. I have issues. I got suspended today. You're human. You have trauma to work through. And yes, you got suspended, but that doesn't change how I feel. If anything, it showed me that you need stability even more, not a revolving door of temporary placements, but a real home, with someone who won't leave when things get hard. Sophia had been crying again, but different tears this time. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now. Think about it. Take your time, but I wanted you to know that this isn't temporary for me anymore. I'm all in. Whether it's foster care, adoption, or some other arrangement, I want you here, for as long as you'll stay. What about your life, your business? Don't I complicate everything? Yes, and that's okay. Sometimes complications are worth it. Edward had smiled. You've complicated my life in the best possible way. Sophia had launched herself off the bed and into his arms, hugging him fiercely. I want to stay, she'd whispered. I want this to be real. Then we'll make it real. They'd held each other for a long time, both crying, both scared, both hopeful. It was the beginning of something new, something permanent, something like family. Starting the formal adoption process had been both exciting and terrifying. Edward had contacted Anthony the next day, who'd helped him navigate the legal requirements and paperwork. There were forms to fill out, background checks to complete, home studies to undergo, psychological evaluations for both of them. Sophia's 3-day suspension had turned into a blessing in disguise. It gave them time to talk, to plan, to start imagining a real future together. On the first day of suspension, they'd sat down with Isabel and made lists of what needed to happen. First, you need a good lawyer, Isabel had said, someone who specializes in adoption. Edward had called his corporate attorney, who'd referred him to Patricia Chen, a family law specialist who came highly recommended. Patricia had met with them that afternoon, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd handled hundreds of adoption cases. This is a bit unusual, Patricia had said, reviewing the situation. Single male adopting teenage foster child, he's known for less than 3 months. The courts will scrutinize this carefully. I expected that, Edward had said. Good, because you'll need to be prepared for questions about your motivations, your ability to parent, your lifestyle. They'll want to know you're not doing this on a whim. It's not a whim. I care about Sophia. She needs stability. I can provide that. Patricia had turned to Sophia. And you want this? You understand what adoption means. It's permanent. Edward would legally be your father. Your name would change if you chose. All parental rights would transfer to him. Sophia had nodded seriously. I understand. And yes, I wanted, even though you've only known him a short time. I've known plenty of people for longer who hurt me or abandoned me. Time doesn't equal trust. Actions do. And Edward has shown me, through his actions, that he's serious about this. Patricia had smiled. That's a very mature answer. Okay, let's talk timeline. The process typically takes 6 to 12 months, sometimes longer. There'll be multiple home visits, interviews with both of you separately and together, background checks, financial reviews. Sophia will need to continue therapy, which will be documented. The court will want to see that this placement is stable and beneficial. What about school? Sophia had asked. Can I stay at Westchester High? Absolutely. In fact, stability in education will work in your favor. The court likes to see consistency. They'd spent 2 hours going over details, requirements, potential obstacles. By the end, Edward's head had been spinning, but he'd been determined. Whatever it takes, he'd said. We'll do whatever it takes. The next day, the home visits had begun in earnest. A new social worker, Margaret Foster, had been assigned to the case. She was younger than Mrs. Morrison, with a warmer demeanor but equally thorough approach. Margaret had spent hours at the estate, interviewing Edward and Sophia separately, observing them together, checking every detail of their living situation. Tell me about your relationship with Edward, Margaret had asked Sophia during one of their private sessions. He's good to me, patient. He doesn't expect me to be perfect. When I mess up, he helps me figure out how to do better, instead of just punishing me. Do you feel safe here? Safer than I've ever felt anywhere. What about his wealth? Does that make you uncomfortable? Sophia had thought about that. At first, yeah, I felt like it didn't belong. But Edward doesn't make a big deal about money. It's just there. He uses it to make sure I have what I need. But he doesn't throw it in my face or make me feel like a charity case, and you want him to adopt you. This isn't him pressuring you. No, God no. If anything, I was scared to hope for it. I never thought someone like him would want someone like me, permanently. Someone like you. You know, damaged, complicated. A kid with a history. Margaret had written notes in her ever-present folder. Sophia, for the record, I don't see a damaged kid. I see a resilient young woman who's survived extraordinary circumstances. Don't sell yourself short. The interviews with Edward had been equally thorough. What made you decide to pursue adoption? Margaret had asked. Because somewhere along the way, Sophia stopped being a temporary placement and started being my daughter. Not legally, but in my heart. And I want to make that official. I want her to have permanency, security, the knowledge that she has a home and a family that won't disappear. You're a single parent. That's challenging, especially with a teenager. How will you manage the work-life balance? I've already made changes. I've delegated more at work, turned down projects that would require extensive travel, set boundaries around my time. My business is important, but Sophia is more important. What about dating? Your late wife passed 3 years ago. At some point, you may want to pursue romantic relationships. How will that affect Sophia? Edward had considered this question carefully. If and when I date again, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that, Sophia's well-being comes first. Anyone in my life would need to understand and accept that I have a daughter. If they can't handle that, they're not the right person. And you're prepared for the challenges of raising a teenage girl, the mood swings, the rebellion, the typical adolescent drama. I'm sure I'll screw it up sometimes, but I'm committed to learning, to being present, to getting help when I need it. That's what good parents do, right? They don't have to be perfect, they just have to care enough to try. Margaret had smiled at that. That's exactly right, Mr. Mendes. The weeks had passed in a blur of appointments and evaluations. Sophia had continued therapy, and her therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, had provided glowing reports about her progress. Sophia has done remarkable work in processing her trauma, Dr. Kim had written in her evaluation for the court. The stability of her current placement has allowed her to begin genuine healing. She has developed healthy coping mechanisms. Her anxiety has decreased significantly, and she's beginning to trust that good things can be permanent. I strongly support this adoption. There had been setbacks, of course. One night in early April, Sophia had woken from a nightmare screaming. Edward had run to her room to find her hyperventilating, convinced she was back at one of her abusive foster placements. "You're safe," he'd repeated over and over, holding her while she shook. "You're home. You're with me. You're safe." It had taken an hour to calm her down. Afterward, they'd sat together in the kitchen drinking chamomile tea while she'd told him about the nightmare. Fragmented images of fire, abandonment, people who'd promised to love her and then hadn't. "I'm sorry," she'd said, exhausted. "I thought I was getting better." "You are getting better. But healing isn't linear. There will be bad nights. That's okay. What if the social workers find out? What if they think I'm too messed up to adopt? Then we'll explain that trauma doesn't have a convenient timeline, that you're doing the work, making progress, and that bad nights don't erase good days." He'd stayed with her until she fell asleep again, then had gone to his own room and sent a detailed email to Margaret about the incident. Better to be upfront than have it discovered later. Margaret had responded quickly. "Thank you for the transparency. This actually reinforces my positive assessment. You're handling challenges appropriately, and Sophia trusts you enough to be vulnerable. Keep up the good work." In mid-April, they'd had a major breakthrough. Sophia had received her report card, straight B's with 1 A in art. It was the best she'd done academically in years. They'd gone to the Museum of Modern Art, had lunch in Central Park, walked through Times Square. Edward had watched Sophia's face light up with wonder and had felt his heart swell with affection for this brave, resilient, remarkable girl. "Thank you for today," she'd said on the drive home. "Thank you for being willing to explore the city with an old man. You're not that old. I'm 53. To you, that's ancient. Nah, you're like, distinguished." She'd grinned at him, and Edward had laughed. These moments, these easy, comfortable, family moments, were becoming more frequent. The awkwardness of the first weeks had faded. In its place was something that felt natural, right? Like they'd been meant to find each other all along. In May, they'd had the court evaluation, a full day of interviews, observations, and assessments at the courthouse. Sophia had been nervous, but Edward had been there for every moment he was allowed to be. The judge assigned to the case, Judge Martha Richardson, had been thorough but fair. She'd asked hard questions, demanded detailed answers, and made it clear she took her responsibilities seriously. "Miss Silva," the judge had said during one session, "you've had 13 foster placements before this one, each one disrupted for various reasons. What makes you think this one will be different?" Sophia had sat up straight, meeting the judge's eyes. "Because Edward doesn't expect me to be perfect. He knows I have problems, and he's helping me work through them instead of giving up when I'm difficult. Because he showed up every single day for 4 months, even when I was pushing him away. Because when I mess up, he helps me fix it instead of sending me back. Because he makes me feel like I matter, and you trust him." More than I've trusted anyone, the judge had turned to Edward. "Mr. Mendes, you're a wealthy businessman with a demanding career. Why take on the responsibility of a teenager with significant trauma history? Why not adopt a younger child with fewer challenges? Or why adopt at all? Edward had taken a moment to formulate his answer. Because Sophia isn't a responsibility, she's a privilege. Yes, she has challenges, but she's also brilliant, talented, resilient beyond measure. She's taught me how to live again, how to care about something beyond work and grief. As for why not a younger, easier child, I didn't choose this logically. I chose it because Sophia needed someone, and somewhere along the way, I realized I needed her too. We saved each other. And now I want to make sure she knows she's safe, permanently, forever. Judge Richardson had made notes, her expression unreadable. At the end of the day, she'd addressed them both together. I've presided over hundreds of adoption cases. I've seen situations that looked perfect on paper fall apart, and I've seen unlikely matches succeed beyond expectation. What I've learned is that successful adoptions aren't about perfect circumstances, they're about commitment, love, and willingness to do the hard work. She'd looked at them seriously. From what I've observed, you'd have that. You've been honest about challenges. You've shown commitment through actions. You clearly care for each other. However, because of the unusual circumstances and Sophia's age, I'm going to order a 6-month trial period before finalizing the adoption. Edward's heart had sunk, but the judge had continued. During that time, you'll continue therapy, continue social worker visits, continue building your relationship. If, at the end of 6 months, everything remains stable, I'll finalize the adoption. Think of it as an extended engagement period, a chance to make absolutely sure this is what you both want. It wasn't the immediate approval Edward had hoped for, but it was progress. We can do 6 months, he'd said, looking at Sophia right. She'd nodded. We can do it. They'd left the courthouse hand in hand, both nervous about the additional waiting but also relieved that they'd cleared a major hurdle. 6 more months, Sophia had said in the car. That's November. Almost a year total. Are you okay with that? I know you were hoping for sooner. I'm okay with it. It's not like I'm going anywhere. And honestly, she'd smiled. It feels good to know we have time to just be. Without pressure, Edward had squeezed her hand. We've got this, kid. Yeah, she'd agreed. We do. Summer arrived with warmth and possibility. Sophia finished her freshman year at Westchester High with solid grades and genuine friendships. She'd joined the art club, started seeing a boy named Marcus, who Edward had awkwardly tried to give. The talk to Sophia had found his discomfort hilarious, and generally seemed to be thriving. The estate came alive in summer. The gardens bloomed with flowers that Maria had planted years ago. Edward hired a pool service to clean and open the pool that hadn't been used in 3 years. Sophia spent hours reading by the pool, drawing in the gardens, finally seeming to relax into the knowledge that this was her home. Edward had scaled back his work even further, much to Margaret Chen's dismay and occasional frustration. The Tokyo deal needs your attention, Margaret had said during one of their weekly check-ins, then handle it. That's why I pay you very well. Edward, I'm your assistant, not a decision-maker. Then, I'm promoting you, Chief Operating Officer. You make decisions. I consult when needed, but I'm not traveling to Tokyo. I'm not working 80-hour weeks, and I'm not missing Sophia's life because of business. Margaret had stared at him. Are you serious? Cool, completely. You've earned it. You practically run the company anyway, and you're really stepping back. I'm not retiring, but I'm changing priorities. The company will be fine. Sophia's childhood won't repeat itself. The promotion had gone through, and Edward found himself with more time than he'd had in decades. Time to teach Sophia to drive a terrifying but bonding experience. Time to go to her art shows at the community center where she'd started taking classes. Time to just exist in the same space without always rushing to the next thing. In July, they'd taken a trip, just the two of them, to Cape Cod. A week in a rented beach house, cooking together, exploring tide pools, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, sitting on the beach watching the sunset, Sophia had asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. Do you ever regret it, taking me in? Edward had looked at her, surprised. Never. Why would you ask that? Because your life was simpler before. You could do whatever you wanted, go wherever, not worry about being home for dinner, or checking homework or dealing with teenage drama. My life was emptier before. Simpler isn't always better, but you gave up so much. I didn't give up anything that mattered. I reorganized priorities. And honestly, Sophia, you gave me more than I gave you. How? You gave me purpose, reason to care. A future that looks like something other than endless work until I die alone in that big house. You brought joy back into my life. Sophia had leaned against his shoulder. I never thought I'd have this. A parent who actually wants me around. Well, you're stuck with me now, for better or worse. Mostly better, she'd said, and Edward had laughed. They'd watched the sun sink into the ocean, comfortable in each other's presence, no longer the separate people sharing space, but something more, a family. Back in Westchester, the social worker visits continued. Margaret Foster had become less of an evaluator and more of a support system, checking in regularly but clearly pleased with how things were progressing. Sophia's therapy reports are excellent, she told Edward during an August visit. Dr. Kim says she's made more progress in 6 months with you than in years previous. The nightmares have decreased significantly. Her attachment style is becoming more secure. She's developing appropriate trust and boundaries. She's done the work. I just provided the stability for her to do it. Don't sell yourself short. You've provided more than stability. You've provided unconditional positive regard. That's powerful for a kid who's spent her life being conditionally accepted. Edward had felt a surge of pride. So we're on track for November. As far as I'm concerned, yes. Barring any major issues, I'll be recommending full approval of the adoption. Thank you. That means more than you know. In September, as Sophia started her sophomore year, they'd had a conversation about the future. What do you want to do after high school? Edward had asked over dinner one night. College, I guess. If I can get in somewhere, you'll get in. Your grades are good, your art portfolio is incredible. You'll have options. Yeah, but college is expensive. Sophia, money isn't an issue. Whatever school you want to go to, wherever you want to study, I'll make it happen. That's too much. It's not. It's what parents do. They support their kids' education. She'd been quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Always, after the adoption is final, can I call you Dad? Edward had felt his throat tighten with emotion. You can call me that now if you want. I want to wait. Until it's official. Until it's real. It's already real. Sophia, the paperwork is just catching up to reality. I know, but still, I want to wait for the right moment. Okay? I can wait. October had brought preparation for the final hearing. Patricia Chen, their lawyer, had prepared them extensively for what to expect. Judge Richardson will ask final questions, review all the reports, and make her decision. Patricia had explained, based on everything I've seen, I'm confident she approved. But be prepared for tough questions. She wanted to confirm this is truly what you both want. It is, Sophia and Edward had said in unison, then looked at each other and smiled. The night before the hearing, neither of them could sleep. Edward found Sophia in the library at midnight, curled up in the window seat with a book she wasn't really reading. Nervous, he'd asked, sitting nearby, terrified. What if something goes wrong? What if she says no? Then we appeal. And we keep appealing until we win. But she won't say no, Sophia. Everything has gone perfectly. Your therapy reports, my evaluations, the home visits, it's all positive. I want this so badly, it scares me. I've never wanted anything this much. Edward had moved to sit beside her. I want it too, more than I've wanted anything since Maria died. You've become my daughter in every way that matters. The adoption is just making it legal. Sorry. I didn't mean to. I shouldn't have touched it. I'll go back upstairs. No, wait. Edward had stepped into the room, hands up in a non-threatening gesture. It's fine. You can play it. That's what it's there for. I can't really play. The sound is nice. My wife played not expertly, but she enjoyed it. She'd be happy knowing someone was using it again. Sophia had looked down at the keys. I always wanted to learn. One of my foster families had a keyboard, but I was only there 2 weeks. Would you like lessons? I could arrange for someone to teach you. No, that's too much. It's not too much. If you're interested, we can make it happen. Sophia had looked at him with those wary eyes. Why would you do that? Because you're interested. Because you should get to learn things you want to learn. Because he'd searched for the right words. Because you deserve good things. Sophia, I know you don't believe that, but it's true. She'd turned back to the piano, pressing a few more keys. Everyone who's ever said stuff like that to me ended up sending me back. I know. And I can't promise I'm different with words. I can only show you with actions. But I'd like the chance to try. They'd sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound the occasional piano note as Sophia experimented with the keys. I'm scared, she'd finally whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. Of what? Of believing you. Of letting myself think this might be real. Because when it falls apart, and it always falls apart, it's going to hurt so much worse if I believed it was real. Edward had felt his heart break a little. This was what the system had done to her. This was the cost of 13 failures. I'm scared too, he'd admitted, of screwing this up, of letting you down, of being just another disappointment in a long line of disappointments. Sophia had looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, he'd seen something other than wariness in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, understanding. So we're both terrified, she'd said. Looks like it. Great. This should go well. It was the first hint of humor she'd shown, and Edward had found himself smiling. Maybe being terrified together is better than being terrified alone. Maybe. Sophia had stood up from the piano bench. I should go to bed. First day of school tomorrow, right? Yes. Do you need anything? Help finding the school? Lunch money? I'm good, Mrs. Lawrence. Gave me all the info. Okay, well, Good night, Sophia. Good night, Edward. She'd left the room, and Edward had stood there by the piano, feeling like maybe, just maybe, they'd turned a small corner. It wasn't much, it wasn't a breakthrough, but it was something. He'd take it. November 15th dawned clear and cold. One of those perfect autumn days where the sky was impossibly blue, and the remaining leaves blazed with color. Edward woke early, his stomach a knot of nerves, despite his reassurances to Sophia the night before. Sophia was already awake when he went to check on her. She was standing at her window, fully dressed in a new outfit they'd bought for the occasion, a simple but elegant navy dress, her hair carefully styled. "Ready?" he'd asked from the doorway. "As I'll ever be." They'd had breakfast, neither of them eating much, and then Isabel had appeared, dressed in her Sunday best. "I'm coming to the hearing," she'd announced. "Your family. I should be there." "Isabel, you don't have to," Edward had started. "I know I don't have to. I want to. This girl has brought life back to this house, and joy back to you. I want to be there when she officially becomes a Mendes." Marianne had met them at the courthouse, so had Anthony and Dr. Kim, and even some of Sophia's friends from school, who'd somehow found out about the hearing. The courtroom had been surprisingly full of people who'd come to support them. Judge Richardson had called the court to order precisely at 10 a meter. She'd reviewed the case file, the reports and recommendations from social workers, therapists, teachers, and character witnesses. "Mr. Mendes, Miss Silva, please approach the bench." They'd stood together, hands clasped, both trembling slightly. "I've reviewed all the materials submitted in this case," the judge had begun. "I've read therapist reports documenting significant progress, school reports showing academic improvement and social integration, social worker evaluations that paint a picture of a stable, loving home environment, character references from multiple sources, all speaking to the positive nature of this placement." She'd paused, and Edward had felt his heart hammering. "I've also noted that this case is unusual in several respects. The age of the adoptee, the short duration of placement before filing, the single-parent status of the adoptive parent. These factors typically warrant additional scrutiny." "Your Honor," Patricia had started to speak, but the judge had held up a hand. "However, I've also noted that sometimes the most unlikely circumstances produce the most successful outcomes. What I've observed in this case is not a wealthy man seeking a tax write-off or a project. What I've observed is genuine, mutual care, respect, and love. I've observed two people who needed each other, finding family in unexpected places." Single quotes. Judge Richardson had looked directly at Sophia. "Miss Silva, do you understand what adoption means? That Edward Mendes will be your legal father in every sense. That you'll take his name if you choose. That this is permanent and binding." "Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And it's what I want more than anything. And you believe Mr. Mendes is committed to this. That he won't send you away if things get difficult." "I know he won't. He's proven that over and over. He's been more of a father to me in 9 months than anyone has in my entire life." The judge had turned to Edward. "Mr. Mendes, are you prepared for the challenges of raising a teenage daughter? The expenses, the time commitment, the emotional labor." "Yes, Your Honor. I'm prepared, I'm committed, and I'm honored to have the chance. And this isn't about replacing your late wife, about filling a void in your life. No, Your Honor, Maria will always be part of my life and my heart. But this isn't about replacement. It's about growth, healing, and building something new while honoring the past. Sophia is her own person, and I love her for who she is, not as a substitute for anything I lost." Judge Richardson had nodded, seeming satisfied with his answer. She'd made a few notes, then looked up at them both with an expression that might have been the smallest of smiles. "The court finds that adoption is in the best interest of a minor child. All legal requirements have been met. Character and background checks are satisfactory. The home environment is appropriate and stable. Most importantly, there is clear evidence of a genuine, healthy, parent-child relationship." Edward had felt Sophia's hand tighten in his. "Therefore, I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Edward James Mendes is now the legal father of Sophia Maria Silva, who may choose to change her name to Sophia Maria Silva Mendes or any variation thereof. Parental rights and responsibilities are fully transferred. Congratulations. This adoption is final." The gavel had come down, and the courtroom had erupted in applause and cheers. Sophia had turned to Edward, tears streaming down her face. "We did it. We actually did it. We did it," he'd confirmed, pulling her into a tight hug. "You're my daughter. Officially, legally, permanently. Can I call you Dad now?" "You'd better." "Dad," she'd said, testing out the word. "My dad, my daughter." They'd stood there holding each other while people congratulated them. While cameras flashed, Patricia had arranged for a photographer, while the reality of what had just happened sank in. Anthony had been crying openly. "I knew it. I knew you'd save each other." Marianne had hugged them both. Welcome to the family, officially. Though you were already family months ago, Isabel had fussed over Sophia's hair and dress, tears in her own eyes. My girl? My beautiful girl. I'm so happy for you both. Outside the courthouse, they'd posed for photos, Edward and Sophia together. Then with all their supporters, Sophia had been radiant, her smile genuine and unreserved in a way Edward had never seen before. How does it feel? He'd asked her as they walked to the car. Like I can finally breathe. Like I can finally believe this is real and permanent and mine. It is all those things. And it always will be. They'd gone to dinner to celebrate the whole group at an Italian restaurant that Maria had loved. They'd toasted with sparkling cider and wine for the adults, told stories, laughed until their sides hurt. Late in the evening, Sophia had stood up to make a speech, her voice only shaking slightly. I don't really do speeches, she'd started, but I wanted to say something. A year ago I was nobody. Just another foster kid cycling through the system, another disrupted placement, another statistic. I'd given up on the idea of family, of home, of belonging anywhere. She'd looked at Edward, and in this guy, this stubborn, grieving, workaholic man, decided to take a chance on me. I fought it. I didn't trust it. I waited for it to fall apart like everything else always had, but he didn't give up. He showed up, every single day, even when I was difficult, especially when I was difficult. Her voice had gotten stronger. He taught me that family isn't about biology or perfection. It's about showing up. It's about loving someone enough to stay through the hard parts. It's about choosing each other, over and over. She'd raised her glass. So here's to my dad, the best non-biological, completely chosen, absolutely perfect father I could have asked for. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for making me your daughter. Edward had been unable to speak, too choked up with emotion. He'd simply raised his glass in return, and everyone else had followed suit. To Edward and Sophia, Anthony had toasted to family in all its forms. To family, everyone had echoed. Later that night, back at the estate, no, back home, Edward and Sophia had sat in the library, both keyed up to sleep. I got you something, Edward had said, pulling out a small, wrapped box. Sophia had opened it carefully to find a delicate necklace, a pendant in the shape of an oak tree, identical to the one he'd given her for her birthday, but this one had a small engraving on the back. Sophia Maria Silva Mendes, November 5th, 10th, Forever Family. It's beautiful, she'd breathed. I wanted you to have something to remember this day, something tangible to hold on to when the doubts creep in. I have something for you, too. Sophia had pulled out a folder from behind her back. I've been working on this for weeks. Inside was a drawing, the most detailed, beautiful piece she'd ever created. It showed the estate, but not as a building, as a home. The gardens in full bloom, windows lit from within, and in the foreground, two figures, a man and a girl, standing together under the ancient oak tree, looking toward the house, looking toward home. At the bottom, in careful script, the heart that was reborn, a story of two souls who found each other. Edward had stared at it, overwhelmed. Sophia, this is... I don't have words. You don't need words, Dad. I just wanted you to see what you gave me. What we built together. They'd sat together in comfortable silence. Father and daughter, looking at the drawing that captured their journey. Outside, the November night was cold and dark, but inside, the house was warm and bright and full of life. Two broken people had found each other in the darkness, and together, they'd built something beautiful, something permanent, something real, a family, not born of blood, but of choice, not perfect, but genuine, not without challenges, but strong enough to face them together. Edward had thought he'd lost everything when Maria died, but in saving Sophia, he'd discovered he'd been wrong. He hadn't lost everything, he'd just been waiting for his heart to find its way back to life. And Sophia had thought she was unwanted, unlovable, destined to drift through life alone, but in being saved by Edward, she'd discovered her own truth, that she was worthy of love, capable of trust, and deserving of a forever family. Together, they'd learned the most important lesson of all, that love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, patience, and the courage to keep choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I love you, Dad. Sophia said into the peaceful quiet. I love you too, sweetheart, Edward replied. Forever. And this time, forever wasn't a promise that would be broken. It was a truth that would endure. The art gallery in Manhattan buzzed with energy and conversation. The Silva Mendes Foundation Gallery proclaimed the sign above the door, a space dedicated to showcasing young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds and funding art programs in foster care facilities across New York State. Tonight was the grand opening, and the gallery was packed with art collectors, philanthropists, journalists, and, most importantly, dozens of teenagers from various group homes. their eyes wide as they saw possibilities they'd never imagined for themselves. Sophia Mendes, now 21, a senior at NYU's prestigious Tisch School of the Arts, moved through the crowd with practiced grace. She'd grown into a confident young woman, her earlier wariness replaced with warmth, though those who looked closely could still see traces of the guarded girl she'd once been. Sophia, a reporter from the Times, approached. "Can we get a quote about the foundation?" "Of course. The Silva Mendes Foundation exists because I know what it's like to be a foster kid with a talent but no resources to develop it. Every child deserves a chance to explore their creativity, to express themselves, to dream. We're here to make that possible, and your father funded all this." Sophia smiled. "My father and I built this together. He provided the financial backing, but the vision, the programming, the connections to the foster system that came from both of us. We make a good team." Across the room, Edward Mendes, now 58, silver-haired but more vital and alive than he'd been in his 40s, watched his daughter with unconcealed pride. Next to him stood a woman with kind eyes and an easy smile, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a child psychologist he'd been dating for the past year. It had taken him for years after adopting Sophia to even consider dating again, and even then, he'd been cautious, making sure anyone he brought into his life understood that Sophia came first. Jennifer understood. She'd actually met Sophia before she'd even gone out with Edward at one of Sophia's college art shows, and the two had bonded immediately. Now she was a regular presence at family dinners, though she and Edward were taking things slowly. "She's incredible," Jennifer said, watching Sophia interact with a group of teenagers from a Bronx group home, explaining her artistic process with patience and enthusiasm. "She is," Edward agreed. "Though I can't take credit. She did the work. She chose to heal, to grow, to use her experience to help others. You gave her the foundation to do that. Don't sell yourself short." Marianne appeared with champagne glasses. "Has she given her speech yet?" "Not yet. That's in 10 minutes. Edward checked his watch. "Good. Anthony's on his way. He got stuck in traffic. He'll be devastated if he misses it." As if summoned, Anthony hurried through the door, slightly out of breath but beaming. At 70, he'd finally retired from active social work, but he served on the board of the Silva Mendes Foundation and was its most passionate advocate. "Made it," he announced. "Sophia ready?" "Almost." "Come on, let's get closer." The crowd gathered as Sophia stepped onto a small platform at the center of the gallery. Behind her hung the painting that had started everything, the heart that was reborn, the drawing she'd given Edward on the night of the adoption, now professionally painted on a large canvas. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Sophia began, her voice steady and clear. "5 years ago, I became Sophia Mendes legally. But the truth is, I became Sophia Mendes the moment my dad decided not to give up on a angry, scared 15-year-old girl who'd been failed by 13 different families." She found Edward in the crowd. "Dad, can you come up here?" Edward made his way through the crowd, joining Sophia on the platform. "This foundation is named Silva Mendes because it represents both parts of my identity," Sophia continued. "Silva, for my biological parents who loved me but couldn't stay. Mendes for the man who chose me and fought for me and showed me what unconditional love actually looks like." She turned to face Edward directly. "You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me safety when I had known only instability. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me a future when I couldn't see past tomorrow. And most importantly, you taught me that family isn't about biology or perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Tears were streaming down her face now, and Edward's eyes weren't dry either. "So this foundation is my way of paying forward what you gave me. For every kid out there who thinks they are too broken, too difficult, too much, I want them to see that there's hope, that someone can choose them, that they can heal and thrive, and build beautiful things from painful beginnings." She gestured to the painting behind them. "This painting is called The Heart That Was Reborn because that's what happened. Your heart was reborn after loss. My heart was reborn after trauma. And together, we proved that love, real, chosen, committed love, can heal almost anything." The gallery erupted in applause. Edward pulled Sophia into a hug, both of them crying openly. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "So incredibly proud. I learned from the best." Dad later. When the crowd had thinned and the gallery was closing for the night, the family gathered Edward, Sophia, Jennifer, Marianne, Anthony, Isabel, who had insisted on being there despite her arthritis, and several of Sophia's college friends. They sat in a circle of chairs in the empty gallery, surrounded by art created by foster youth, drinking champagne and sharing stories. "Remember when we first met?" Sophia asked Edward at St. Isabel's. "I was so sure you'd be just like all the others. Remember when you threw a lunch tray at that girl at school and I had to pick you up?" Edward countered. "I was convinced I had no idea what I was doing." "You didn't," Sophia laughed. But you figured it out. We figured it out together. Anthony raised his glass. I'd like to propose a toast. To taking impossible chances. To choosing love over fear. To families that aren't born but built. To Edward and Sophia, who saved each other and are now saving countless others. Here, here, everyone chorused. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Edward and Sophia found themselves alone in front of the painting that had started it all. Do you ever regret it? Sophia asked quietly, choosing the complicated teenager over a simple, peaceful life. Edward looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Regret? Sophia, you're the best thing that's happened to me since Maria. You brought me back to life. You gave me purpose, joy, a reason to be better. The only thing I regret is all the years you've suffered before we found each other. I don't regret those years anymore, Sophia said thoughtfully. They made me who I am. They taught me resilience. They made me appreciate what we have even more. That's very mature of you. I learned from my dad. He's pretty wise. She grinned. Most of the time, Edward laughed and put his arm around her shoulders. Come on, kid. Let's go home. Home. Sophia repeated the word, still sometimes catching her by surprise with its weight and wonder. Yeah. Let's go home. They walked out into the New York night together, father and daughter, their journey from broken strangers to unbreakable family, complete. Behind them, the painting glowed in the gallery lights, two figures under an oak tree, looking toward a house that had transformed from a mausoleum of grief to a home filled with love, laughter, and new beginnings, the heart that was reborn. Two hearts, actually, finding each other in the darkness and choosing, over and over again, to be family. Not perfect, not easy, but real, permanent, and worth every difficult moment. Because in the end, love, real love, isn't about finding someone who completes you, it's about finding someone who helps you become who you are always meant to be. And Edward and Sophia had found that in each other forever.